Shabbat Shalom. This story is told of a certain young boy. We'll call him Menachem. Now, Menachem was a bit of a klutz. And sure enough, every time he brought food from the kitchen into the living room, he would spill a little along the way. And his mother, a very loving mother, would go down to the basement, grab the vacuum, bring the vacuum cleaner back upstairs, and vacuum after Menachem. Well, as we parents know, after a little bit of time, this gets a little tiresome. And after a little bit of time, we recognize that our kids are now old enough to clean up after themselves. So sure enough, after enough time passes, and Menachem's mom gets tired of vacuuming after her child, she says, "That's it. Menachem, you made yet another mess. Here's what I need you to do. I need you to go down to the basement, get the vacuum cleaner, bring it up, and clean up your mess." So Menachem, being the obedient boy that he is, walks to the basement door, opens it up, and peers down into the darkness. Panic overtakes Menachem. So he turns back to his mom and calls out, "But Mom, it's so dark and scary down there. It's so dark I can't see anything." Menachem's mom thinks for a second. She says, "Menachem, wherever we go, God is always with us. Trust in God. God will help you. Now go down to the basement and get the vacuum cleaner." So sure enough, Menachem runs back to the basement door, opens the door, looks down again in the darkness, and calls out, Mom, there might be creepy crawlies down there. There might be wild animals down there." Menachem's mom very calmly says, "But Menachem, wherever you go, God is always with us. You can trust God. God will help you." Oh, Menachem nods and goes back to the door again, opens it up, looks down in the darkness, and yells out, "But Mom, there might be bad guys or aliens from another planet down there in the basement." And sure enough, Menachem's mom says to her son Menachem, "Menachem, God is with us wherever we go. Trust in God. God will help you." So sure enough, Menachem walks back to the basement door, opens the basement door up yet again, looks down in the darkness, and calls out, "God, if you're down there, would you mind bringing up the vacuum cleaner?" We read our Torah, and we see an interesting parasha this week. But I think as we study this parsha, we come to see a lot more about us. Because we live in a time in which trust is very hard to come by. Now, we Jews, after 2,000 years of persecution and oppression, of murder, it's understandable that we'd have a hard time trusting other people, and especially the nations in which we live. It's pretty understandable that after Auschwitz, we would have a hard time not only not trusting the nations that are around us, but maybe not even trusting God as well. And I'll note that especially since October 7th, it makes sense that we would have a hard time trusting the world in which we live. Because it seems like no matter which way we turn, no matter what we do, what's thrown at us is injustice, is anti-Semitism, is Jew hatred. And all you have to do is pick up a newspaper this week to see the accusations against the Prime Minister and the Defense Minister of Israel. To know that no matter what Israel does, we can't seem to get a fair shake in this world. Everyone seems against us. And what's come to develop, I think, is a trust problem. We have a hard time trusting others. And now even we don't often put our trust in other individuals. Sometimes we'll just put our trust in technology. And we'll ask the doctors in the room, surely Esther and Rich, WebMD is always right, always helpful, right? One day you might get a phone call from your rabbi or your cantor wishing you a Shabbat Shalom, and you're not going to know whether it's really us or whether it's artificial intelligence calling you. For now, it's us. But we have a trust problem in this world. And I think we Jews especially have a trust problem. And I wonder to what extent this trust problem that we have, our fear of other people, and even more so, our reluctance to trust God, is leading to the anxieties that plague our society today. I wonder to what extent a renewed trust in God might help overcome fear of the dark, fear of heights, fear of small spaces, fear of flying in airplanes, and the general anxieties that overtake us today. I wonder if we need to really focus on a renewed trust in God. Now, as we turn to our Torah portion this week, Parashat Behar, we come to see multiple levels to what is ultimately a very short Torah portion. Now, the most basic level we could read it is that this is a good lesson to farmers. Because the Torah says that you should attend to your fields for 6 years, and on the 7th year, you let it lie fallow, you let the land do its own thing, and what ultimately the land does is replenish itself. We could very easily read this as an environmental mitzvah. And okay, maybe it is. But I don't think that that's the central message of this week's Torah portion. We can dig a little deeper, and we can come to see that really the message of this week's Torah portion, Parashat Behar, is about economic justice. Because if we follow the mitzvot of this Torah portion, what we'll see is that there will never be a permanent underclass. If we follow God's laws, with regard to the Shemitah and with regard to Yovel, with regard to the sabbatical year and the Jubilee years, with regard to making sure that no one goes entirely impoverished and without a home, that no one goes hungry, then what we see is, as a society, we're creating a level of economic justice, of righteousness, where those who have take care of those who have less, not because it feels good or not because it's a good deed and not because it's a write-off, but because it's an obligation for us to do. Because that's what family does for each other, and we Jews, we're family. We take care of each other. And so certainly we could read this week's Torah portion and focus on the laws of economic justice that give rise to, as we heard earlier, Asher taught us so beautifully. Where'd he go? There he is. That Asher taught us so beautifully. That's why we have the Jewish Federation of Metro Detroit. It's why we have Jewish Family Service. It's why we have Yad Ezra. It's why we've created the incredible institutions, and I'm so proud to be part of Shaarey Zedek, where the leaders of these institutions that built them and developed them and run them and guide them, they come by and large from this congregation because we're so committed to this idea of caring for each other. Kol Yisrael Aravim Zeh B'Zeh, our rabbis teach us. All of Israel is responsible one for each other. But I think there's another layer of depth to this week's Torah portion. God says 6 years, it's up to you to tend the fields. But the 7th year, you are forbidden from working the land. The only thing that you get is whatever the land itself produces. Or as God comes to clarify, the only thing you get in that 7th year is whatever I give to you. We're obligated in that 7th year to trust God. Now, emunah, faith, I think by and large comes easily to the Jewish people. We have faith in God. But bitachon, but trust that God will provide, is another level of commitment that I'm not sure we're ready to accept. Now, trust me, bitachon, this idea of trusting in God, is not something that comes easily to me. I'd go so far as to tell you that I struggle with it almost every day. What does it mean to trust in God? I can't stand when people say, don't worry about it, God will provide. I think there's nothing that abdicates responsibility more than that concept. God will provide. What do you mean God will provide? We're obligated to provide for each other. We're obligated to some level of self-reliance and self-care so that we make sure that things happen the way they're supposed to happen. To just say that God will provide is an incredible abdication of responsibility for ourselves and for those around us. And I think, frankly, there are too many people in this world who simply think that others will provide for them, and therefore they have no need to take responsibility for their own actions. And that's why I think the brilliance of Shemitah, the brilliance of this obligation of tending to our fields for 6 years and on the 7th year letting it lie fallow is all about bitachon, is all about trust in God, because it says don't give everything over to God. 6/7 of everything that happens, that's on you. But that last seventh, that last little bit, remember you're not in control of everything. It's incredibly humbling and hard for us to hear. You are not in control of everything. Give it up to God. In our Haftarah this week that Asher read so beautifully, the prophet Jeremiah is in prison because he gave a prophecy to the king of the time saying the Babylonians are going to defeat the Jews and exile us to Babylonia. Well, the king didn't like that prophet. He didn't like that prophecy. He threw Jeremiah into prison. And there in prison, Jeremiah has an opportunity to acquire land, to purchase land in the land of Israel. Now, Jeremiah just had a prophecy that the Babylonians are going to come and to destroy the land. If Jeremiah is a really good businessman, he's probably going to pass up on the opportunity to buy some land in the land of Israel. But God appears to him, and God says to Jeremiah, it'll be okay. So sure enough, Jeremiah buys the land, writes the deed to the land, gives it to his faithful assistant Baruch, and Baruch goes home and hides it in his basement. Now what happens next? The Babylonians destroy the land of Israel. But 50 years later, the Jews are allowed to return. And sure enough, that deed to the land is still in Baruch's basement. And Jeremiah and his family are able to reclaim their possession. Do you have that kind of trust in God? Do you have that kind of faith? In next week's Haftarah, and what would have been this week's Haftarah if it were the double portion that it usually is, we add another couple of verses from Jeremiah where it says, Baruch HaGever Asher Yiftach B'Adonai. Blessed is the person who trusts in the eternal. Blessed is the person who trusts in the eternal. Are you that kind of person? It also says, Arur HaGever Asher Yiftach Ba'Adam. Cursed is the person who trusts in another human being. As we move forward in this week, moving out of Parashat Behar and into the last chapters of the book of Leviticus and then into the book of Numbers, I want to invite you on a journey. What does it mean for us to trust in God? And I don't just mean faith, I mean trust. What does it mean to say that 6/7 of everything that happens is our responsibility, but that last seventh, we're going to give to God? Will you join me on this journey of exploring what it might mean to say, I can't handle everything. God, I need your help now. What might it mean for you to join me in casting open the door, looking down into the darkness, and saying, God, if you're there, I could use your help. May God grant us the strength that goes beyond faith, but the strength that comes from trusting in the Holy One. And once we achieve that trust, that bitachon, may God bless us all with peace. And we say together, Amen.